Our core values are not just something we have so that we can tick organizational requirements. They are what it means to be a people coming alive in the love of God, as modeled by Jesus, and extending that work of life to the world around us. That is why we have a series that we are calling We Are Called. And then we follow it up with the 5 core values. We are called embracing radical grace. We are called serving with compassion. We are called connecting with kindness. We are called stewarding with generosity. We are called wholeheartedly present. And on August 31st, for some reason, there was an error in my programming, and I've been saying 35 the whole month. On August 31st, we have some exciting announcement that we will share with us all. So we invite you to that special service. You'll be sharing some news of a big change that pertains to who we are and how we shall be known moving forward. So you are welcome. Someone has come to me and said, I won't be there on August 35, so please tell me. 31st. That day. Yeah, anyway. So I'm happy that you're anticipating. Today we are on our 3rd core value, connecting with kindness. We live in a world that is so rushed and stressed out. People are a bit harassed, and people are angry a lot. People shout at each other. In such a world also, people disconnect with each other. They do not have access to each other. And there's something about the things we ache for, the things we long for, that experience a very big blessing when people connect together. When people connect together. I came across a fascinating story about a rabbi and his students. The rabbi once asked his students, why do we shout in anger? Why do people shout at each other when they are upset? Anyone who has never? Right? And the disciples thought for a while, and one said, well, we lose our calm. We shout for that. But why to shout when the other person is next to you? Isn't it possible to speak to them in a soft voice? Why do you shout at a person when you are angry? And the disciples gave him some more answers, but none satisfied the rabbi. Finally, he explained, when 2 people are angry at each other, their hearts distance a lot. To cover that distance, they must shout in order to hear each other. The angrier they are, the louder they will shout to each other so that they can hear each other through the great distance. Then the master asked, what happens when 2 people fall in love? They don't shout at each other. They talk softly and tenderly. Why? It is because their hearts are close. The distance between them is close. They can speak softly to each other because they can listen and hear. As we talk about connecting with kindness, it is an invitation for us to realize that we find ourselves in a world and among a people who are pressured and crowding out the space for kindness. Connecting with kindness for us is an invitation to ask ourselves, how shall we serve such a world? How shall we engage people with what they need most, which is the presence of Jesus? We will have to connect with them with a kind presence. So connecting with kindness for us is the core value that tells us we are on mission. We are on mission. Embracing God's radical grace, the first one we talked about, is where we encounter God's presence and love so powerfully that it changes us. Serving with compassion, we begin to attend to each other. Connecting with kindness invites us to a place where we realize the love and presence of Jesus that has touched us is so amazing that we can't keep it in. we will need to share it with another. And for sure, in a world so rushed and hustled and stressed out, we need to wear kindness, the kindness of Jesus as we engage these people. I was thinking about 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 to 16 that says, always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you. Yet, do it with gentleness and reverence. The good news of Jesus is powerful and transformative enough on its own. But we need to share it with kindness and a winsome presence. Always remember we have a message so good to share. We are a way in for others into the goodness of doing life with Jesus. People need to hear that, but we must do it with a lot of kindness and goodness as well. And so that's why we say we are connecting with kindness. You may have heard it said, be kind, for everyone you meet is facing a major battle. Everyone. Even in this room. For some, it's obvious. Life has a way it has dealt with them so hard, but we all carry a struggle, an ache, a gap somewhere. So be kind. You know, that situation unites us so powerfully. We are all united by that. In fact, one poet says, show me your scars, yours, and I'll show you mine. Because everyone has, yeah? So, it is good for us to be kind, That's what we're thinking about. And as has been customary in this series of the core values, we are looking at how Jesus demonstrates each one of them. And today we will look at a story where Jesus is excellent at connecting with kindness. The story is found in John chapter 4, verse 1 to 19, and then we will read 25 to 30. John chapter 4, verse 1 to 19. And then 25 to 30. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given his son, Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me as a woman of Samaria?" Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water will water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. Jesus said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. Just then the disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking to a woman, but no one said, what do you want, or why are you speaking to her? Then the woman left her jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he? They left the city and were on their way to him. The word of the Lord for us today. Thanks be to God. This is a wonderful story, perhaps one of the most well-developed dialogues of Jesus in the Gospels. Like you can just tell, he says, she says, they go on for an entire time. But it's a powerful story. So Jesus is leaving the hassle of being opposed by the Pharisees. Perhaps it was around Jerusalem, but somewhere in Judea. I have a map on one of the slides. And so they are opposing him because his ministry is growing. And so he decides to go up north to Galilee. But he passes through Samaria and takes a break in a Samaritan town called Sychar, which in the Old Testament, it was known as Shechem, very common in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, there's some history there why this map, as you can see, Samaria is like that. The Samaritans were the outcome of the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel in the year 722 BC. After King David and King Solomon, the kingdom split into two. King Jeroboam went north with 10 tribes. King Rehoboam remained south, Judea, that region there. So all the area north was Israel. The Assyrians conquered it. Every ancient empire had its way of establishing its authority. When Nebuchadnezzar conquered the southern kingdom, some 200 years later, his approach was taking everyone captive, moving them to Babylon. Now, the Assyrians did not do anything like that. They conquered you, then they brought other people to inhabit your land and to intermarry with you so that your identity as you knew it is completely erased. And so that's what the Assyrians did when they conquered the northern kingdom. They brought people who intermarried with the Jews. And from then on, even through the Bible, the northern kingdom ceases to exist. What we hear of Israel is only Judea, 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah. They were the only ones now who carried on with the story of Israel. Now, because the northern tribes were intermarried, the southern kingdom, the real Jews, looked down on the intermarried Jews, and they called them impure, and they called them Samaritans. So there was history there. In fact, when most Jews were to travel north, they disliked the Samaritans so much that they would not walk through Samaria. They would actually bypass it. They would rather go around the long way to make it north. That is why in this story, it's so profound when it says Jesus went through Samaria. Even from that, the story is highly unusual. Because Jesus came to break down walls of hostility between us. It is very intentional that he decides to go through Samaria. And so this story begins to have its impact just by the geography of it and the route that Jesus takes. Being in Samaria is bad enough for him. What are you doing there? You're a rabbi. You're a Jew. And what about hanging out with Samaritans? Even worse. What about hanging out with a woman? This is a rabbi of good repute. Even worse. What about hanging out with a woman who had a questionable reputation? Even worse. Everything about this story made the proper Jews, nervous. This story disrupted their sensibilities completely. Perhaps it's not just for those Jews, it's for us, it's for all our human biases. Yeah, they begin to be disrupted by this story. The second thing we see in that story is, or the question we can ask is, why is this woman at the well at midday in the scorching heat? In the scorching heat. Typically, women in that time would come to draw water together in groups. They would do so early morning or morning hours or evening hours when it was cooler. However, this Samaritan woman visited the well alone at noon. It's almost like she knew when she can appear at the well and there will be no one else over there, suggesting that she was perhaps not accepted in the normal social circles. So a traveling Jewish rabbi meets a Samaritan woman at a well and asks her for a drink of water. Sees her, engages her, asks her for a drink of water. There is someone who commented and said, this may have been the first time in her life she had ever heard a kind word from a Jewish man. Maybe anyone Jewish at all. She would have been shocked. She would have been shocked that he even looked at her and spoke to her. And even more, that he would drink from the same cup that she offered him. That was also completely disruptive. But it's so typical of Jesus. He broke through all the man-made traditions and boundaries in one instance. Little did this woman know that kindness was the breakthrough she needed. One kind gesture is what she had been searching for. And that day, something profound was going to happen in her life. We do not have to be rough brutes with our message. The harvest is ready and plenty. What would it look like to connect with people who are searching and longing and marginalized and connect them to Jesus with our kind actions? Another thing that comes up from this story is the outcome of that interaction that Jesus had with this woman. The woman was not aware of what was going to happen that day. She could not have planned it. But after interacting with, encountering Jesus, she went home, not carrying a jar of water, but with a spring within her, gushing fountains of endless life. That is how the Message translation describes it. A spring within her, gushing fountains of endless life. One real encounter with Jesus. Only one. And the deepest struggles within her were healed. And where there was struggle before, there was now life, freedom, hope, and healing. Fountains of endless life. One encounter with Jesus. Do you know what is Jesus' number one enemy? Anything that holds us back from stepping into the life he has for us. He moves against that. Yet that is what we are all deeply and quietly longing for. That is what many people are actively searching for. And unfortunately, many of them in all the wrong places. We're all longing for a quality of life that can only be found in Jesus. And Jesus knows in this moment what that looks like. He even describes it as living water. We are so thirsty for a quality of life that we all, seek it through our means. Maybe for this woman, it was from relationship to relationship. Yeah. And Jesus comes and says in that moment, I will offer you living water and you'll never be thirsty again. You know, they say we are living in perhaps the most addictive age that has ever existed. From substances to social media to many things. We have so many options that capture our attention, you know, that we are all hooked to. And in such an age, we are moving around distracted. There's a fascinating book that was written called Dopamine Nation. And it goes on to say that most of us are addicted to dopamine. Any moment when we're bored, we will always have something to raise the excitement. On the surface, it's like that, but deeper we are all going for things. We are looking for living water, living water, living water, living water, living water, living water. And Jesus comes, and Jesus, in this story, became living water for the woman. She needed that, but she didn't know it was to be found in Jesus. In the same way, Jesus is to become living water to us and living water to everyone around us. Later on in the conversation, the woman tells Jesus, I hear the Messiah is to come and he will tell us everything. And Jesus tells the woman, I am he. I am the Messiah. Scripture commentators say that is the first person Jesus told that he is the Messiah. Can you imagine that? A woman marginalized at the well. But that revelation completely transformed her life. So this encounter with Jesus is at the heart of who we are, who we've been called to be as followers of Jesus. We bear a message that has power to do for others what it did to the Samaritan woman. This is not a message to keep for ourselves. With all the ways that people are struggling around us, this is not a message to keep for ourselves. We are to encounter Jesus as living water, first and foremost, within us. Within us. And we should not wait. We should let another know what it looks like to do life with Jesus. We bear a message. And we can be conduits of that message to one another. We can be people who facilitate profound life transformation in others. How I long for us to have many of those moments where we really know Jesus as the Messiah in life-changing ways, like the woman at the well. And how I long for us to see many others experience the same. Another thing that comes up from this story is this. The woman runs back to her city and tells everyone, come and see a man who has turned my life around. And the whole city listened to her. And they came to Jesus. And chapter 4 concludes with many people in the city actually responding to Jesus, now we have believed, not because of what the woman said, but because we have also encountered you ourselves. I feel this is the invitation then we have. We have seen how Jesus does it at that moment in the well. Now we are to go back to our city. We are to go back to people around us. We are to share, come and see, come and encounter. We are to be facilitators of people encountering the life-giving presence of Jesus so much that it transforms their lives. You know, sometimes I think when it comes to sharing the message of Jesus, we feel like it's hard. Like it's a hard thing to do. We feel like, first of all, we have no opportunity or we don't know how to go about it. We feel like we have to work at it a lot. But from this story, there's not so much that the woman did. She just encountered Jesus personally until she forgot her business of fetching water. That she ran back to the city and said, come and see a Messiah who has done something in my life. And I feel that that is what we are called to do, just to hunger, to seek that experience with the Messiah that is so profound in us, that we cannot help it, that we cannot keep it within ourselves. We just have to let other people know. We say that we are a church that longs to see people in our world coming alive in the love of God as modeled by Jesus. In other words, we long to see a people so shaped by the presence of Jesus that it becomes living water inside of them. And that is why we must be a people connecting with kindness, reaching out. That is why connecting with kindness matters so much to us, because we want to see more people come to life in the love of God as modeled by Jesus. Yeah. And now in this story in John chapter 4, I was reading around that as the church continued to institutionalize, they decided to give this lady a name, and they gave her the name Photina, Photina, the light bringer. What a cool name, right? The light bringer, because she went back to her city and told others about the Messiah. That's what happened to her. So I would like to leave us with a few practical invitations of what connecting with kindness should look for us. And the first one is this: there is always time to be kind. This statement in itself is the exact opposite of how we feel. We are so busy, we are so rushed, traffic out, traffic in, exhausted, you just want to get home and sleep. Like there's no time to be kind or to look around and to look at the margins. And so the first practical application of connecting with kindness is to just have a new mindset. There is always time to be kind. You know, we live, and I've been saying, in a rushed and stressed out world. As a result, people are suffering and are pressured. You know, it can feel like even ourselves, we don't have the time and the energy for one more thoughtful and kind connection with another. But it is not meant to be so with you. If you are followers of Christ, we are to move against that tide of culture and say, I have time to be thoughtful and kind with others. The story says earlier on that Jesus, tired out from his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. They estimate that from Jerusalem to Sychar, it's about 40 miles. Now, I don't know exactly whether his journey began in Jerusalem, but he had covered quite some miles, and it was a hot day. What do you think he needed most? A nap, right? If it was me, just some time to be quiet, not to talk to anyone, to recover. But maybe it's true, Jesus really needed some drink of water, right? And maybe he was so thirsty he couldn't nap before. But he had the time and the space for a woman scorned and marginalized. He had all the time to hear her story. He had all the time to draw her out, to get to the root of things. And this led to the profound transformation in her life. And not just her life, but many others in her city, and many more in her lifetime. We have to go out of our way to create some time for kindness. I'm going to put Brent on the spot here. Earlier in the year, he was telling me how part of his work is really connecting to the staff and teachers in the school where he lives. And he told me he will go to Nick's Donuts and buy a box of donuts and show up at each of the teachers' doors, right, with a box of donuts and ask the question, how are you? Right? I was blown away. I was like, I'm not even such a good pastor anymore, right? But who goes out of their way to leave the house in the morning? You know, why not just walk over and say, hi, how are you, right? But Brent, I celebrate you. I think being around you, you're one of the words that can just describe you is thoughtfulness. You always have time. You always go out of your way to do that. And I think I'm going to carry that lesson. I'm going to do better, right? There's a Jesuit priest who works and has worked with gang members in the most violent area of Los Angeles City. His name is Greg Boyle. So he has spent his life doing that. He tells a story in his book called Tattoos on the Heart, how one day he was preparing for a baptism service that was about to begin in a few minutes when a woman called Carmen walked in. And so this is what he writes in that book. Now, I have 7 minutes until my baptism. Carmen is a dusty blonde, which couldn't be the color God originally gave her. She's attractive, but so worn by heroin and street life. She plops herself into one of the chairs in the office and cuts the fat out of her introductory remarks. I need help. She launches right in, brush and something of urgency. She says, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. She smiles. Her eyes wander around my office, and she studies all the photographs hanging in there. I think there were many photographs in that office. She multitasks, and her inspection of the place doesn't derail her stream of consciousness rambling. I think to myself, the family will arrive for baptism in 5 minutes. She continues, I went to Catholic school all my life. Fact, I graduated from high school even. Fact, right after graduation is when I started using heroin. Carmen enters some kind of trance at this point, and her speech slows to deliberate and halting. And I have been trying to stop since the moment I began. Then I watch as Carmen tilts her head back until it meets the wall. She stares at the ceiling, and in an instant, her eyes become 2 ponds of water rising to meet their edges, swollen banks spilling over. Then for the first time, really, she looks at me and straightens. I am a disgrace. Suddenly, her shame meets mine. For when Carmen walked into that door, I had mistaken her for an interruption. When I started my internship in ministry, there wasn't a lot of ceremony to get you started. But I remember a conversation I had with my supervisor then, Bishop Gibson. He told me, at the end of this year, you will look back and you'll have done so many things. But the one thing you will never forget are the conversations you had with people one-on-one. May you do more of that. Then he concluded by saying, people are never an interruption. And I think that's his mantra in life. He keeps on saying that even today, people are never an interruption. There is always time to be kind. I know you won't see it. I know that's not how it feels like, but there is. If Jesus can have all the time for this woman by the well, then what would it look like for you and I, for us together, for all of us, to make time to be kind? For a world so disconnected with the healing love of Jesus, let us have that time. So the second invitation, practical invitation, is this. Offer the gift of listening. Offer the gift of listening. Most of life, it is not so much what we say as it is that people feel heard. Yet, in a very noisy and distracted world, truly listening to each other is a gift that can mean so much. Jesus took time to share who he was, to probe a few questions but he listened. That quote I read earlier that says perhaps that's the only kind word she had ever heard from a Jewish man. Maybe this is the very first time she had talked about her life in that much detail in a long time, because there was someone who was listening. To hear her, Jesus heard her so truly and fully that Jesus began to hear what was being unsaid. Jesus began to discern the longing and the ache beneath her story. What people are going through and facing will not be on the surface. They won't wear it on their foreheads. As I look at you, I cannot tell what burdens you carry. Only in conversation, where you're heard, maybe would it be possible to discern what's going on underneath. And what does Jesus do when he sees what's going on underneath? He realizes that this woman has been longing for living water, living water, living water, husband after husband, alone and marginalized. And Jesus said, I am he. I am the living water. So may we make time to truly listen. A story is told about a pastor. When I tell stories about a pastor, there's an agenda, right? He was giving it all in his sermon, but there were two noisy teenagers at the back. So he became very frustrated that he interrupted his sermon and said, you two who haven't heard a word of what I'm saying, please be silent and pay attention. And of course, maybe the teenagers sat upright. And when the service ended, he went at the back and shook hands of people as they were leaving. And 6 adults apologized that they were not hearing a word, and it won't happen again. Right? So I hope you're listening to me. I hope you've been listening. But in other words, I love the quote that says, be like little children. They pretend they're hearing nothing, but they hear everything you're saying, and you'll hear them quoting what the adults were saying. And they were busy playing. On the other hand, grown-ups sit and listen and pretend that they're listening. Yeah, but it's the way life is, because we are preoccupied with what to say next or with many other things. But what if listening is the point? What if listening is the point? It matters so much that what if cultivating deep listening could be a spiritual practice for you? The next time you're with someone, consider it a listening hangout rather than a chat. A listening hangout. Be the listener. Make that intention. I hear that when you're with someone and you truly pay attention to the color of their eyes, to their eyes, you look deeply in their eyes, it improves listening. I had it like 2-3 months ago, and it works. So it works. Just whenever you're talking to someone, just look keenly into their eyes. And I was like, where was I looking before? Right? Where was I? Because I'm paying attention to their eyes, and I hear more. So cultivate listening. Most importantly, be fully present with others and hear them deeply. Because, like I've said, we may just hear the deep cry underneath, and it will help them connect that cry to the Messiah, because that's what they're needing. May we be those who hear, because people are crying out. The third and final invitation is this: be a presence of hospitality. Be a presence of hospitality. Be a host. You know, the word hospitality sometimes might make you feel that it's only when you invite someone to your house and offer a meal. This is really just being a welcoming presence to people wherever you are, that you're approachable, that they know you'll hear, you'll see them. I think it's an outcome of the first 2 invitations, time to be kind and the gift of attentive listening. It may mean that you slow down enough, be attentive enough, be curious about who they really are. There's a side invitation to that, which is be a presence of kindness within you. within you. It's very hard to extend kindness to another when you are going through a storm, a raging storm within. We've been called to slow down long enough, heal within us, experience the peace of Christ, encounter the Messiah so profoundly that he becomes living water within us. Have the Messiah touch our cries and our aches, that it becomes an outflow of who we are. So slow down regularly, rest, heal, connect. I think we live in a world that is so rushed and busy that we are stretched thin also. May we be those who rest. Why? Because you need space to be kind. You need to be attentive to others. Why? Because they need to encounter the living water now more than ever. So take that nap, rest, take that leave, cultivate that margin, tend to the kindness within. I came across a poem that says, it's short, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize it, and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. Isn't that what we're talking about, right? We begin by making, I love the image, making a clearing in the dense forest of our lives. We've been so bogged down by so many things. Let's make a clearing. A deep connection with Jesus who says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It sounds like a clearing in the dense forest of your life. Jesus had the space, all the space within himself for the woman and all she brought. And the impact was a deep life transformation. May that be the story of our lives. I'm going to close with another story. A storyteller who is also a medic called Rachel Naomi Remen writes a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, Stories That Heal. In one of the stories called The Meeting Place, she tells of a head of a department of medicine at a certain hospital who used to see a very unique patient. The patient was a homeless woman whose possessions could fit, all her possessions could fit into 2 shopping carts. He saw her once a month on a Wednesday. Her speech was sometimes rambling and her clothing was filthy and eccentric. This deeply kind and respectful man was not troubled by this. With his usual grave courtesy, he welcomed her into his consulting room, listened to the details of her difficult life, and did what he could to ease her burden. After he had been seeing her for some time, he became aware that she sometimes came to the hospital on days when he was not there. The clinic nurses were puzzled by this at first, as she seemed to know in some mysterious way that it was not her day to see the doctor. After talking with her, they determined that she simply wanted to go to his consulting room. Once there, she did not go in, but would stand on the threshold and slowly and deliberately place her right foot inside the empty room and then withdraw it again and again. After a while, she would be satisfied and go away. Rachel Naomi Remen concludes by saying this: the places in which we are seen and heard are holy places. They remind us of our value as human beings. They give us strength to go on. Eventually, they may even help to transform our pain into wisdom. The places in which we are seen and heard are holy places.